Hello, everyone. Nadeem here with PCSN. So I got asked this question. I thought I'll make a video on this. So remote desktop, you better know it as Remote Desktop Services Host, RDSH, or just Remote Desktop Services, RDS. This is when you have a Windows server and you have remote desktop services enabled on it, and all your users connect to this server. It could be one or more servers. They do all their work. So this is a great way to do it because you're sharing resources. One server resources are being shared between multiple users. And then we have Azure Virtual Desktop. There's a difference between these two services. So Azure Virtual Desktop on the back end uses Windows 10, or what Microsoft calls Windows 10 Enterprise. So there are some licensing requirements, but there is a difference between these two architectures, functionality difference. So not just that one is a desktop operating system, the other one is a server operating system. That's just one thing. But here's the big thing that users will see. When you use RDSH on a Windows Server OS, the traditional way of doing things, you're going to have a hard time with any kind of real-time media. What I mean is voice/video. So if you're used to doing conference calls, you're going to have a hard time doing a conference call in Teams or Zoom, whatever have you, over just RDSH. It's going to be choppy. It's going to be kind of broken up. It's not going to work very well. However, when you use Azure Virtual Desktop, you will notice that Teams, Zoom, these kind of apps work really great. The reason why things work great in Azure Virtual Desktop, but not in the traditional remote desktop. In the traditional remote desktop, when you're using Teams, what's happening is the Teams video from your machine is getting encoded and then getting decoded at the server, and then getting encoded again, and then getting decoded on the other side. But when you use Azure Virtual Desktop, Microsoft uses something called WebRTC. It's a new protocol. And what that does is something really cool. So instead of that Teams data going through the remote desktop connection and then getting encoded and decoded twice, the client machine gets the Teams video directly from the other machine, the machine that they're video conferencing with. So basically the encoding decoding only happens once. And that's why Azure Virtual Desktop, you can actually hold Teams video conferences, but in our traditional remote desktop, you have trouble. Hopefully that makes sense. I know it's a big issue. Most places where they have RDSH, they would recommend do not use Teams in the RDSH environment. Some companies will actually disable it, so you can't use it even if you wanted to. Some companies will disable just the real-time protocols in Teams, so you can't do video conference or phone calls in Teams, but you can use chat and things like that. Now, there are other providers out there that have this technology as well. So I know VMware has it in their Horizon suite. Citrix has it, and it's a similar thing. It's using WebRTC. It's decoding directly at the client. Think of it kind of like bypassing the RDP protocol, the remote desktop protocol, sending the Teams data directly between your machine and the other machine. And the way it's able to do that is because the client that you use in technologies that support WebRTC, the client that you use is just a browser. And that browser is what allows that direct connection for Teams, Zoom, whatever have you. So hopefully that kind of will give you a little direction on what technology you want to use for remote desktops, centralized computing, or multi-user computing, whatever you want to call it, multi-session computing. The problem why some companies don't use Azure Virtual Desktop or other, maybe Citrix or Vmware, is you have to have multiple roles deployed on multiple servers. So if you just need 5-6 users, doesn't make sense from a cost perspective, right? Because you'll have to spin up, a remote desktop connection gateway, a remote desktop broker. There's just so many different RDSH. The remote desktop session hosts itself. So there's, you'll have to spin up a few servers to be able to do that. So it doesn't make sense for 4 to 5 users. But if you have, let's say 100 users, 200 users, it makes sense. And that's why larger companies do deploy these kind of technologies. And this is where Azure Virtual Desktop comes into play. So Microsoft made that piece easy. So now you can use a wizard in Azure and deploy your Azure Virtual Desktop infrastructure with a few clicks, and Azure Automation does the heavy lifting on the back end. It's still going to spin up those servers and all that stuff, but it's going to do that automatically for you, and yet allow you to choose what size machines you want to deploy. And also it takes advantage of Azure Active Directory on the back end. So instead of having your own domain controller and your separate Active Directory, it just relies on Azure Active Directory. So there's a few things that Microsoft's trying to do here. Number one is better user experience. Number two is more seamless experience. And then, of course, it doesn't hurt because you're integrating everything with Azure AD. You have no choice but to go to Azure AD, and you have to pay Microsoft for that. So, it's what you would call win-win-win situation. Hopefully that makes things a little clear. If you have questions around this, I'll be happy to answer them. The Windows Virtual Desktop is something different. So think of it this way. Azure Virtual Desktop is for partners and providers so they can spin up stuff for their clients. Windows Virtual Desktop is to where users themselves can spin up their machines in Azure, machines that they can use for central computing. So hopefully that helps you out. Everybody have a great day. We'll see you next time.